Imagine this: Australia, a country known for its unique wildlife, once called in the army to fight birds. Subscribe and share. Not just any birds, mind you, but emus. And get this, the birds won. In 1932, something truly wild happened. 20,000 emus, pushed inland by a relentless drought, descended upon the wheat belt of Western Australia. They didn't just wander, they invaded, devouring precious crops, tearing down fences, and turning drought-stricken farms into their personal, all-you-can-eat buffet lines. The government's response? Machine guns, 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and 3 men in uniform. What followed was less a conventional war and more a chaotic, feathered Benny Hill chase scene. Here's how this bizarre conflict unfolded, and why the emus still strut around like undefeated champs. Section 1. The set-up life in Western Australia after the Great War was anything but easy. Many returned soldiers had been granted marginal land, often in agriculturally challenging areas, as part of a settlement scheme. They were told to grow wheat, right as global prices for the grain plummeted during the Great Depression. These inexperienced farmers were already barely clinging on, with many abandoning their land. Then, as if economic hardship wasn't enough, the emus arrived. Driven by drought from their usual inland habitats, an estimated 20,000 of these towering, flightless birds migrated into the wheat belt. A single mob could flatten an entire crop overnight, and their destructive rampage broke fences, which then allowed other pests, like rabbits, to flood in for dessert, compounding the farmers' woes. Desperate, farmers pleaded with the government for help. Newspapers, ever dramatic, started calling the birds invaders. Sir George Pearce, the state's Minister of Defence, eager to appear useful and show support for the struggling veterans, offered military assistance. So, into this unfolding chaos stepped Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, armed with 2 Lewis automatic machine guns, 2 privates, and a truck that, as they'd soon discover, couldn't outrun a sprinting emu on rough terrain. Section 2, Opening Gambit. Major Meredith's plan sounded deceptively simple: herd the birds into a designated kill zone and mow them down. But, as he quickly learned, emus don't exactly queue up politely for anything. Problem 1, the birds were wary, often scattering into small, agile groups when approached. Problem 2, even when they did get close, the Lewis guns, while formidable, had a nasty habit of jamming after the first burst of fire. On the very first day, the crew fired dozens of rounds, managing to kill maybe a dozen birds, if they were lucky. The rest? They simply jogged into scrubland so thick that the truck bounced like a trampoline, making pursuit impossible. Local journalists, who had tagged along hoping for a spectacle of military prowess, mostly got muddy boots and the occasional ricochet. That night, a frustrated Meredith wired Perth, "We are dealing with shrewd opponents." The emus, it seemed, had barely broken a sweat. Section 3, Guerrilla birds. Within a week, the birds proved they weren't just fast, they were clever. What Aussie ornithologists later dubbed textbook guerrilla tactics became their signature move. Flocks would split into agile squads of 10 or 20, sprinting at speeds up to 50 km an hour in unpredictable zigzags. If a gunner swung the heavy barrel of the Lewis gun left, the birds would veer sharply right. They often used lookouts to warn the main group of approaching soldiers. And talk about resilience. One emu famously absorbed multiple hits, kept running, and only collapsed after it had cleared a hill, well out of sight. The Major's own words, printed in the press, perfectly captured his growing bewilderment. If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine gun fire with the indifference of Sherman tanks. Farmers, despite their plight, couldn't help but laugh. It was just too absurd. Section 4, Human errors multiply. The weather certainly didn't help. Rain turned the red dirt into a thick, clinging glue, bogging down the truck and forcing the gunners to fire from the hip, a far less accurate method. In one particularly embarrassing incident, an emu darted under the vehicle, clipped the differential, and sent the truck nose first into a gum tree. Ammunition got soaked, tempers flared, and the kill tally stalled to a trickle. Parliament, back in Canberra, started hearing whispers and then outright complaints of wasted money and military embarrassment. They demanded a head count. After a fortnight, the grim reality became clear: fewer than 900 birds were dead, and a staggering 10 rounds had been fired for every feathered casualty. Newspapers across Britain and America eagerly reprinted the story under headlines like "Aussie Army retreats from birds," turning a local crisis into international mockery. Section 5: Political fallout. The Labour opposition didn't miss a beat, roasting the government for turning trained soldiers into glorified pigeon shooters. One member of Parliament sarcastically proposed a new medal, the EMU Cross, to be awarded for valour against overwhelming beaks. The sheer public ridicule, amplified by the media's gleeful coverage, forced Defence Minister Pearce to withdraw Major Meredith's unit. When questioned in Parliament, the minister had to admit the operation had failed to make any significant dent in the estimated population of 20,000 emus. The chamber reportedly dissolved into laughter so loud that the speaker's bell couldn't restore order. The military's initial attempt to solve the problem had become a national joke, and the emus, meanwhile, kept right on eating the wheat. Section 6: What finally worked. With the army gone and their machine guns packed away, the state government decided to try a different, and significantly cheaper, approach: a bounty system. They placed a bounty on every emu beak. Suddenly, local farmers, keen-eyed kids with rifles, and even traveling swagmen were bagging birds for cash. It wasn't glorious, but it was effective. In just 6 months, residents claimed bounties for an astonishing 57,000 emus. This community-led effort, coupled with the government releasing 500,000 rounds of .303 ammunition to farmers and encouraging the construction of more robust exclusion fencing, finally brought the situation under control. Crop prices slowly recovered, fences were rebuilt, and the migrant mobs of emus splintered. It proved that when faced with an adversary that has a 2-meter stride and a pea-sized brain, community effort and practical, decentralized solutions often beat machine gun bravado. In conclusion, Australia's strangest conflict ended not with treaties or victory parades, and certainly no statues of triumphant humans. The emus, despite losing thousands of their number, undeniably won the narrative. The army kept its pride, perhaps, but certainly lost the headlines. Today, tourists in the wheatbelt can still spot descendants of those battle-hardened birds, strolling through paddocks like veterans who know a secret: sometimes, the best tactic is simply to keep running. Next time you see an emu, give it a respectful nod. It's the only bird that can claim, with statistical backing, it defeated the Australian military.